January 20th, 1953, the top marginal tax rate was 92%. Truman just fired MacArthur about 2 years ago because he threatened to nuke North Korea. You could buy a house and support a family off of a single income. Well, as long as you were the right skin color anyway. And General Eisenhower, the dude that won World War II, just got elected president. And Inauguration Day, January 20th, is today. But that's not the important part of this story, because 229 miles away, a groundskeeper and a homemaker in Brooklyn, New York, just welcomed Jeffrey Epstein into the world. Now, this isn't a total history of Jeffrey Epstein's life, but I do want to focus on the fact that Jeffrey Epstein, when he was a kid, was what kids would, when I was growing up, would refer to as a dork or a nerd. That is basically the nice way of saying that he was really smart. And he actually skipped 2 grades, and he graduated high school at 16. And after graduating high school, he attended the Coverup Institute of Mathematics, studying mathematical physiology, which is a thing that I had no idea existed. But ultimately, he left before receiving a degree in 1974. Okay, so it's 1974. Jeffrey Epstein has just left his college. He did not get his degree, but he does need a job. So he gets hired at the Dalton School at 21 years old to teach math and physics. Now, interestingly enough, just 3 months before he gets hired, the headmaster of the Dalton School was one Donald Barr. Remember that last name? It might become important later. But he only lasts 2 years at the Dalton School, and he's dismissed ultimately for poor performance. But in reality, there was a lot of reports that he was kind of, how would the kids say it these days, a weirdo, a creep even, inappropriate. He would go out and flirt with underage female students, and he would go out and party and drink with them. That doesn't seem very ideal, but ultimately, it's 1976 now, and he needs another job. Okay, so we're in 1976. Jeffrey Epstein just got dismissed from the Dalton School because, he might have done a little inappropriate things. So they say, but I don't know. So where does he go from here? Well, it's a good thing that he might have been a good teacher, because he actually made some connections of the kiddos in the Dalton School. One Alan Greenberg offers him a job at Bear Stearns. Yes, that Bear Stearns. And he starts in Bear Stearns in 1976. He works for Bear Stearns for about 5 years. He makes partner in 4, so in 1980 he becomes a limited partner at Bear Stearns. But just a year later, he has to resign because he, might have done some securities fraud or something, specifically Regulation D of the Securities Act of 1933. So the year is 1981 now, and Jeffrey Epstein needs another job. Okay, I forgot to mention this in the last part, but he has to leave Bear Stearns for doing financial manipulation or, violating some act of the Securities Act of 1933. But how badly do you have to mess up in order to get fired from Bear Stearns, one of the banks that is largely responsible for, blowing up the housing market and basically crashing the US economy? I don't know. I just wanted to mention that because I think that's weird. Okay, if you haven't been paying attention, we're in 1981 now, baby. Ronald Reagan's president. The New York Islanders have just won the Stanley Cup somehow. Sorry, New York, you should only have one hockey team. The Dodgers win the World Series. Raiders of the Lost Ark is the most popular movie in the country, and Bette Davis Eyes is at #1 on the Billboard charts. But in the same year, we got our friend Jeffrey Epstein. He needs another job, but he's a forward-thinking capitalist. He got money in mind, so he's going to found Intercontinental Assets Group, or IAG, in 1981. So it's the 1980s. Jeffrey Epstein, he's got his fund, Intercontinental Assets Group, or IAG. What does IAG actually do? Well, it's a gigantic fund that is basically a way for foreign governments to launder money. He goes after people who are embezzling money. He goes after foreign governments who are embezzling money. It's very strange. It's a two-way street where he goes after people who are embezzling money, but he also has clients that are embezzling money. It's very odd that I am assured that he has no intelligence ties at all. But let's talk about Saudi Arabia, right? So Saudi Arabia was like the middleman for Iran-Contra, and one of Jeffrey Epstein's clients was Adnan Khashoggi. Why does that last name sound familiar? I don't know. So Adnan Khashoggi was like the middleman for the Iran-Contra affair, and he was one of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. That much we do know. And in 2017, when the FBI raided his house, they found a fake Austrian passport that listed his residence in Saudi Arabia. Weird. So, also, while he was becoming an international man of mystery, he also did some other shenanigans. Like, he did work for Towers Financial Group, which was a giant debt collection agency, mostly of people that had, like, medical debt, which is somehow not the grossest thing that Jeffrey Epstein has done, which, eventually imploded and became one of the largest Ponzi schemes in US history. Jeffrey Epstein was never held accountable for this. Weird. All right, so Jeffrey Epstein has been an international man of mystery for about the past 8 years now, but we're in 1988 now. George H.W. Bush got elected president. Read my lips. No new taxes. The Edmonton Oilers have won the Stanley Cup, and somehow the Dodgers have won the World Series again. Weird. But Jeffrey Epstein, he needs another side hustle. He really does. So he creates Jeffrey Epstein and Co. And he is basically an investment management fund, and it only has one client, and that is Les Wexner of L Brands, the parent company of Victoria's Secret. Now, I'm sure that nothing bad happened with Jeffrey Epstein being around, young women, except it did. Gross. But in 1990, Donald Trump gets a new neighbor because Jeffrey Epstein buys a mansion in Palm Beach, Florida. Now, look, guys, I'm not trying to, make any accusations or anything that aren't based on publicly available evidence. So if you're triggered by this in the next parts of this video, which I'm going to be sitting down for because I'm tired of standing, do your homework. Go on the internet. It's free. But in the 1980s and the 1990s, we know that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were intimately part of the same social circle. In 1992, there's that famous video clip of them partying and laughing together. In 1997, we know that he was on the Lolita Express, or the Jeffrey Epstein plane, as we might call it. In 2000, there's that picture of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Melania before she was married to Donald Trump. And in 2002, there's the infamous quote where he says, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. It said that he likes women on the younger side," or something like that. But that's what I'm talking about here. So we're going to kind of delve deeper into the connections between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. If you want to know more about his business activities and his foreign intelligence ties, which I might get into a little bit later, like I said, the internet is a thing and you can use it.
Hello, I'm much more comfortable now. Thank you for asking. I just didn't want to stand because I have a lot to read and go over. So I just kind of figured it would be easier to not do that while standing up. But let's kind of get into it here, okay? So we know like the background of Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. Now let's kind of get into what has happened from like 2004 onwards. Okay, so in 2004, Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein had some sort of falling out. There's been stories that say that it was about a real estate deal. Donald Trump had recently said that he kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago because he was, quote, stealing girls, which is a very weird way of saying that, but whatever. And in 2005, the Palm Beach Police Department arrested Jeffrey Epstein after they started investigating him for crimes. The case finally concluded in 2008, and Jeffrey Epstein basically got off scot-free. He had to register as a sex offender. He only served 13 months in custody. Most of the time he got out with like work release and stuff. But that plea deal was negotiated by Alexander Acosta, who would become Trump's first labor secretary during his first administration. And even though he got arrested and was literally convicted and became a sex offender, he still basically maintained everything, all of his wealth, all of his assets, and all of his connections. And he was still meeting with like powerful people, like just mentioning a few: Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, gross, and former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, the human liver spot. So during this period, in like 2017, Alexander Acosta said that he was supposed to, or he was told to leave Epstein alone because he belonged to intelligence. That's crazy. That's insane. But ultimately, Epstein was finally arrested again in July 2019 on federal trafficking charges in Florida and New York, and he was held without bail at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. Now, on August 10th, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. The death was like basically immediately ruled as a suicide by hanging, but there was some irregularities. But Attorney General Bill Barr, remember, His dad was the headmaster at the school that Jeffrey Epstein was teaching at. Like I said, that's kind of weird. He labeled the death quickly as a suicide and closed the investigation, despite even admitting that there was irregularities. That's weird. Now, after Jeffrey Epstein died, that wasn't the end of everything. There was like civil suits against his estate that paid out like millions of dollars to his victims. Investigations into his associates continued. Like in 2021, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted and sentenced to for sex trafficking and conspiracy. So not everything died down, but we never got any answers as to what Jeffrey Epstein was actually up to. So let's talk about modern day, right? So Donald Trump announced he was running for president again in 2023, and he promised to declassify a lot of these things like the Epstein files and 9/11 and JFK and MLK and all that stuff. And the entire like right-wing media ecosystem, like the podcast sphere through people like Cash Patel and Dan Bongino, Bingo Bongo Bongino,
should do. You're protecting the world's foremost predator. That seems like an evil thing to do, regardless of who may be embarrassed in the release of that list. Why is the FBI protecting the greatest pederast, the largest scale pederast in human history?
Simple, because of who's on that list.
Way off the topic, but who has Jeffrey Epstein's
Black Book?
Black Book?
FBI.
But who? That is that. I mean, there's.
that's under direct control of the director of the FBI.
They basically made an entire career out of talking about like how Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton were in the Epstein files, which like, yeah, obviously, duh. But like Bill Clinton's a pedophile. Like we all know that. Send him to the forever jail, like the forever jail underneath the forever jail, like the forever jail. That's where Bill Clinton needs to go. I'm not going to defend Bill Clinton here. Okay. This is not a Bill Clinton friendly program. Let's just get that out of the way. But again, Donald Trump basically ran on declassifying the Epstein files. And then he did an interview where he was kind of cagey about, releasing the Epstein files, saying that, there's a lot of phony stuff and hoaxes in there, which.
Classify the 9/11 files.
Yeah.
Would you declassify JFK files?
Yeah. I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know it. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world. But I think I would, or at least
do you think that would restore trust? Help restore trust?
Yeah, I don't know about Epstein so much as I do the others.
I don't know, man. Like, just given like the social connections and the history and, they were neighbors, like, you would think that that's kind of suspicious, or as I'm told that the kids nowadays say, sus. Okay, so the Democrat Party does what the Democrat Party does and fucking loses because they ran a corporatist soulless suit that ran on the idea of being Joe Biden, the sequel. Like, why? Whatever. Donald Trump wins the presidency, and his entire narrative around the Epstein files starts to change, where he starts being like super cagey about it. So in early 2025, like starting in January, Donald Trump, gets inaugurated. Kash Patel and Pam Bondi are immediately confirmed as the FBI director and the attorney general. And both had basically been like, yeah, we'll release the Epstein files. Don't worry. In February, Dan Bingo Bongino is appointed as the deputy FBI director, and he states, I'm not letting this go regarding the Epstein files investigation. In late February, Pam Bondi announces the phase 1 list, or the phase 1 part of the Epstein files. And it turns out that it's just already publicly known information regarding the Epstein files. And then she goes on Fox News and is like, I'm sorry, the real list is on my desk. It's just we're redacting the victim's name out. It's like,
releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President.
Well, why did you release the stuff that we already knew then if you didn't have anything new? It was just kind of seemed a little bit strange. Now, obviously, nobody was like buying any of this, but basically they just were doing like so much unhinged that, people couldn't keep up. So it kind of went in the back of people's mind a little bit. But in April, on April 25th, Virginia Jeffrey, which was alleged as one of Epstein's victims, was found dead in Australia ruled as a suicide. She had posted earlier in the year that she wasn't suicidal. There's a lot of other things going on there, like regarding mental health and stuff like that. Suicide is obviously very, very tragic. Don't need to say why, but basically the administration is like, yep, she killed herself. Okay. And then in May, Dan Bongino had basically completely changed his stance on the Epstein files. He goes on Fox News and he's like, yes, Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. I have seen the whole file. And if you don't believe me, you are stupid. And he's basically attacking like the MAGA base, which was an interesting strategy.
Combine that with the other evidence where we will be releasing in the coming weeks. We're still finalizing some of the products. I think it's pretty clear. However, as I've clearly indicated in some of my tweets on my official account, listen, investigations, if new information surfaces in the future on any of these cases, we're always open. I'm just telling you, there's nothing there in the file at all that indicates anything other than, in fact, a suicide.
And then in June, Kash Patel, he goes on the Joseph Rogan Experience, which I am told is a rather popular podcast. And he basically says, yeah, like Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. I've seen the whole file. There's nothing in there.
And they indict him. And he's awaiting trial. And I've said it. Dan Bongino said it. We've reviewed all the information. And the American public is going to get as much as we can release. He killed himself. Do you think, let's play out the logical conclusion of this.
This obviously starts to raise some red flags and some questions. So, there's a couple Republicans like Thomas Massey. They begin forming in the House and are like, why haven't you released the Epstein files yet? Okay, so the same month that Kash Patel goes on the Joseph Rogan Experience, like I said, I am told that it is a very popular podcast. He releases a memo from the FBI stating that a systematic review found no incriminating client list and there was no evidence of human trafficking, even though Ghislaine Maxwell was sitting in prison for human trafficking. Like, trafficking what and to who? Like, if there was no evidence of trafficking people to anyone in particular, why is she in jail? That's kind of weird. In July, Charlie Kirk and other right-wing influencers basically are like, I'm done talking about Epstein. You should just trust the government.
Honestly, I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. I'm going to trust my friends in the government to do what needs to be done, solve it, balls in their hands. I've said plenty this last weekend.
What? At the end of July, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche secretly meets with Ghislaine Maxwell in Florida. And she reportedly was like, yeah, no, Trump had nothing to do with this. And then she, interestingly enough, got transferred to like a super minimum security prison in Texas. And there's been whistleblower allegations that she's getting like special treatment and privileges and stuff like that, which that's not suspicious at all. In September, a bunch of the survivors were holding a press conference in DC. And, there was like a bunch of fighter jets that flew over. And then the administration was like, it's a ceremony. It's like a ceremony for what? Like covering up being a pedophile? Like,
when it had already happened. This woman abused children.
I don't know. And then in late September, Mike Johnson, who looks like the nerdiest man alive, blocked the attempt to add any types of Epstein file release to the National Defense Authorization Act. Now, in the later half of this year, in October, Virginia Jeffrey's posthumously, her posthumous memoir gets released. It's called Nobody's Girl, and it revealed a bunch of information that, no one really knew. And then on October, Alex Acosta, remember, he was the one that gave the sweetheart deal to Jeffrey Epstein in the 2008 case in Florida. He testifies before the House Oversight Committee, and, there's been some leaks that say that he basically lied about the strength of the 2008 case. and the reasons that he basically gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal. And then finally, the government reopens. And then on November 16th, the Epstein Files Transparency Act passes via a discharge petition. And Trump signs it because he doesn't want to, get it vetoed, because that would look really, really good from an optics perspective. It is interesting that there was everyone voted to release it except one Republican named Clay Higgins, who is genuinely one of the funniest members of Congress. If you don't know him, you should look him up. Anyway, in late November, there was whistleblower reports of scrubbing and redacting of the Epstein files from the FBI. And Pam Bondi also opened another investigation to try and delay some of the files getting released into powerful Democrats. And then on just a couple days ago, on December 12th, House Oversight Democrats released more Epstein photos showing, Trump and, with women. And there was also some with Bill Clinton and, Steve Bannon, the human liver spot. So that leaves us where we are today. And, okay, I can't believe that I made this video and I completely forgot to mention the emails that the House Oversight Democrats released. So let's talk about those, because those are kind of insane. Jeffrey Epstein in April 2011 wrote to Ghislaine Maxwell, and he said, quote, "I want you to realize that the dog that hasn't barked is Trump. Redacted spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned, police chief, etc. I'm 75% there." Now, when this got released, I was like, oh, well, that just means that Donald Trump hasn't ratted or something. I wasn't sure. Apparently it's a Sherlock Holmes reference, but I mean, reading Jeffrey Epstein's emails, you kind of get the clue that he was basically illiterate because he can't spell or type. I was very, very confused that there was a hidden meaning from this, but I don't know. In 2015, before the presidential debate, Michael Wolff sent an email to Jeffrey Epstein. They were corresponding. Michael Wolff is a journalist. Jeffrey Epstein is obviously, the pedophile. The exchange goes as follows, quote, "I hear CNN planning to ask Trump tonight about his relationship with you." That was from Michael Wolff. Epstein replies, "If we were able to craft an answer for him, what do you think it should be?" Wolff replies, "I think you should let him hang himself. If he says he hasn't been on the plane or to the house, then that gives you valuable PR and political currency." That's blackmail, right? Yes, Jeffrey Epstein had some sort of blackmail on Donald Trump. This email literally reveals it. So, I mean, that's at least a little bit of motive. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a cop. I'm not a PI. I'm just a dude on the internet, and I think that that's fucking weird. In January 2019, an email came out. Again, this is Jeffrey Epstein and Michael Wolff talking. Jeffrey Epstein sends an email to Michael Wolff, and it said, "Trump said he asked me to resign. Never a member ever." Talking about Mar-a-Lago. And he said, of course he knew about the girls, and he asked Ghislaine to stop. Now, what does Trump know about the girls? Are we saying that there was some trafficking going on, that Kash Patel said that there was no trafficking? What are we talking about here? What am I supposed to interpret from this? Now, you can say this is blackmail. I mean, or, this is blackmail, fake news, hoax, whatever, but what? Okay, so that's Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein right now in the year 2025. But I do want to touch on a couple other relationships that Jeffrey Epstein had real quick. Jeffrey Epstein was heavily involved with Ehud Barak, who is the former prime minister of Israel, and he heavily invested in Ehud Barak's company called Carbine, which is a facial recognition and data surveillance company that sells your facial recognition and biometrics to police departments. I'm not making that up. He was also, like I said, with Adnan Khashoggi in the 80s as an arms dealer. There was also Russian connections with Russian energy tycoon Viktor Vekselberg. That's interesting with Russia, what? But he has significant ties to very powerful people, not only in the political class, but also intelligence agencies and stuff like that. So if you're watching this, I am mentally well. I am not feeling like harming myself at all. Take that with what you will. Okay, I'm not a cop. I'm not a private investigator. I have seen a lot of Law and Order and the First 48, and at work, I am subjected to hours and hours of forensic files. So I am basically an expert in the realm of criminal investigation as much as you can be from being forced to watch reruns of 1990s television. But I know that you need three things in order to build a case, right? You need motive, means, and opportunity. So let's go over the motive. Okay, so Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein had a established social relationship. They were neighbors. They hung out. There's pictures of them hanging out. Recent photos and emails that the Democrats have released may reveal that relationship was deeper than we ever knew. Like the condoms with Trump's face on them, which is weird. I don't know what to think about that. But the motive is like, if any of this ever actually came out and Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein's relationship was a lot deeper than we knew previously, like if Jeffrey Epstein had blackmail on Donald Trump that he could hold that over his head and influence political decisions, well, that's motive right there. Because I mean, if that ever actually came out, Donald Trump's political career would be fucking over. Or, in a normal world in which we live, you would think that it would be, but I don't know. All right. Second thing, you need means, right? Well, if you're the most powerful man on the planet and you have control over like intelligence agencies and, things like that, I mean, it's not really that far-fetched to say like, yes, that could definitely be a thing. And then you need opportunity. Well, being in jail is, it's a great opportunity, especially if you can, maybe pay off some guards or make sure that the cameras, don't work at a specific time. Now, interestingly enough, earlier this year, Pam Bondi did release some of the jail footage, and it was known to be altered. And then they lied about why. They said that they enhanced it. Like, what? It's like 10 FPS shitty surveillance camera footage. What is there to enhance? But there was about 3 minutes of missing footage. So, motive, means, opportunity. We have those three. Now, I'm not saying that he did, but based on publicly available information, it's kind of hard to ignore some of that. So we have 3 or 4 days, depending on when this video comes out, before they release the Epstein files. And I personally do think that they're going to be heavily redacted, especially things, pertaining to Trump, especially if the FBI is actually redacting like whistleblower reports have suggested. I mean, that is not that far-fetched to think about. Where does that leave us? Well, I don't know. I don't know if this stuff is ever actually going to come out, but there's a lot of evidence that are making me suspicious. And most notably, like the institutions and especially like the media sphere on the right has changed 180 degrees from where they were a year ago. That is definitely very suspicious. It feels like they're manufacturing consent for some fuckery and tomfoolery, shenanigans even. So we'll see where this ends up. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It definitely helps me with the algorithm. If you wouldn't mind, maybe go check out some of my other content. I appreciate you watching. And again, I am mentally well, and I am not feeling like harming myself. Have a good day.